The Mugoma villa was glowing with wealth and pride. Expensive cars lined the driveway. Inside, the living room was filled with family members dressed in their finest clothes. Sparkling jewels, designer shoes, loud perfumes, and even louder voices. Laughter echoed as people hugged, posed for photos, and whispered about who would get what. They weren't really mourning Chief Sephew. They were here for the will. Everyone was excited. Some were even pretending to be sad just for appearances. And then in the corner stood Naima. She wore a plain, old-fashioned traditional dress, her hair tied back simply. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. Her sandals were dusty from the village road, and she clutched her small handbag nervously. She didn't speak much. In fact, no one really noticed her, except to whisper cruel things. "That's the maid's daughter," one auntie scoffed. "She came all the way from the village for what? Maybe a spoon." Another laughed. Naima heard them, but she kept her eyes low and her heart steady. She didn't come for gold. She came because her father had called her in his final hours. And somehow she felt that this day would change everything. Naima sat quietly on the edge of the big velvet sofa, her hands resting on her lap, her eyes taking in everything but saying nothing. Around her the air was thick with perfume, fake smiles and loud conversations. But no one talked to her. No one asked if she had eaten or how she had been. She was like a shadow in her own father's house, a guest, a stranger. Her aunties walked past her, not even bothering to hide their disgust. One of them leaned closer to another and whispered loudly enough for Naima to hear. "You can still smell the firewood on her clothes. Village girl." They all laughed. Naima looked down at her dress. It was clean and carefully ironed, but yes, it was simple. It was her mother's favorite fabric, a soft green chiton she had worn to church. It reminded Naima of home, of warmth and truth. But here it made her look poor, out of place. Her half-brothers, Malik and Aching, stood near the drinks table, whispering to each other as they eyed her with smirks. "That's the maid's daughter," Malik said, loud enough for others to hear. "I bet she thinks she's here for an inheritance." Aching snorted. "Maybe a chicken or a hoe." They laughed, high-fiving each other as if they had won something. Everyone else around chuckled too, pretending not to notice how cruel it was. Even the family lawyer, Mr. Tambo, cleared his throat awkwardly but said nothing. Naima didn't cry. She just sat still, her heart aching quietly. She had always known she was different. Her father, Chief Sephew, had never married her mother. But he used to visit. He used to send money. He once called her my lion-hearted girl, when she stood up to a teacher who insulted her mother. But now, in this house full of fake smiles and greedy eyes, that memory felt far away. And yet, deep inside, something told her to wait. Not to run. Not to break. She hadn't come this far just to be humiliated. Something bigger was coming. She could feel it. The room fell quiet the moment Mr. Tambo walked in. He was the family lawyer. A tall, serious man in a dark suit with glasses that always slid down his nose. He held a thick brown folder in his hand, and just that alone was enough to make hearts race. Everyone knew what was inside. Chief Sephew's will. He nodded politely, adjusted his tie, and took a seat at the big wooden table in front. The air grew tense. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Laughter faded. Even the children were sent outside. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. Mr. Tambo cleared his throat and began. "As per the last wishes of Chief Sephew Mugoma, I will now read the contents of his official will." Everyone leaned in. Some crossed their fingers. Others exchanged knowing glances. A few even smiled like they already knew their names would come with mansions and millions. The older aunties pulled their wrappers tighter, adjusting their jewelry like queens preparing for coronation. Malik and Aching sat tall, confident, as if the company shares were already in their pockets. Naima sat quietly in the corner, almost forgotten. No one looked at her. No one expected anything for her. Not even her mother, who kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Mr. Tambo continued reading. "To my son Malik Mugoma, I leave the penthouse apartment in Kidala City. To Aching Mugoma, the luxury hotel property in Kisula. To my brother Tomasi, I leave the Mpeketoni Farms. To my cousin Wanja, the beach house, and..." The list went on: cars, houses, large sums of money. Every name came with gasps, claps, hugs, and loud praise. Chief Sephew really left us well," one uncle whispered with a grin. But Naima's name hadn't been called. She watched silently as the lawyer turned each page. She wasn't angry. Not yet. But something inside her had started to ache. Maybe this really was how it would end, forgotten just like they always wanted. And then Mr. Tambo paused and said, "And to Naima." The room lit up like a party as Mr. Tambo read out the names and their gifts. It was like a dream come true for everyone, except Naima. "To Malik Mugoma," the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. "A fully furnished penthouse apartment in Kitala City, along with an annual maintenance fund." Malik grinned proudly. People clapped and congratulated him like he had won a trophy. He stood up, bowed slightly, and winked at his cousins. "Chief knew who the real son was," he whispered smugly. "To Aching Mugoma," Mr. Tambo continued. "The Sapphire View Luxury Hotel in Kisula, along with full ownership rights." Aching almost jumped from his seat. "Yes," he shouted. Some cousins clapped louder than before, hoping to stay in his good books. He turned to Naima and chuckled. "Hope there's something left for the village girl." Naima said nothing. She just kept her eyes on Mr. Tambo, trying to stay calm, but her heart was thumping hard. One by one, the lawyer went through the rest of the family. Aunt Wanja got the beach house. Uncle Tomasi got the large farmland and a luxury SUV. Cousins got cars, bank accounts, and plots in prime city areas. Even distant relatives walked away with something. The room turned into a celebration. People hugged, exchanged phone numbers, and started making big plans for their new fortunes. Naima sat still. No one looked at her. Some even walked past her as if she were invisible. Her mother glanced at her once, then looked away quickly, her face heavy with shame. Still Naima stayed calm. She wasn't here to beg or fight. She had come out of respect for her father. But with every name called, with every luxury announced, a quiet voice inside her kept whispering, "You don't belong here." But just as the noise was reaching its loudest, Mr. Tambo raised his hand to signal silence. He cleared his throat and said, "And finally to Naima." The room froze. All heads turned. A hush fell like a storm cloud. And then he said it. "And finally to Naima Mugoma," Mr. Tambo said, his voice steady. "A small wooden box, left personally by Chief Sephew, with instructions not to be opened until after the will is fully read." For a moment there was silence. Then came the laughter. Loud, cruel, echoing through the grand living room like thunder. Someone clapped mockingly and shouted, "Maybe it has mango seeds inside." Another voice added, "Or groundnuts from the village." Even Malik laughed so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. "A whole box? Maybe it's firewood for her kitchen," he joked. Aching snorted. "She came all the way for this? I'd be ashamed." The aunties giggled behind their fans, pretending to be polite, but their eyes sparkled with cruelty. Even cousins joined in, whispering and laughing into each other's ears. Naima sat still, her fingers wrapped tightly around the box now resting on her lap. It was plain, old, and carved with her father's initials. The wood smelled of home, of the village, of her childhood, of rainy evenings with her mother waiting for letters from Chief Sephew. But right now it felt like a curse. Her mother, sitting beside her, shifted uncomfortably. She didn't say a word. She didn't touch her daughter's hand. She just looked down, ashamed, as if agreeing with everyone else. This is all she deserved. Naima swallowed hard. Her eyes burned but no tears came. Not here. Not in front of these people. She looked at Mr. Tambo, hoping he would say something more. A second gift, a correction, a mistake, but he didn't. He simply closed the folder and said, "That concludes the public reading." Just like that it was over. The riches had been given. The room was back to its loud, proud energy. People were already calling drivers, making calls, planning trips. Naima looked down at the box in her hands. Everyone else saw it as a joke. A leftover. A shameful gift. But something about it felt different. Heavy. Secret. Important. And then Mr. Tambo's voice broke. With trembling hands, Naima slowly opened the wooden box on her lap. The lid creaked softly, like it had not been touched in years. The room, which had just moments ago been roaring with laughter, suddenly grew quiet again. Not out of respect but curiosity. What could possibly be inside that old thing? Inside the box were several worn-out letters, yellowed with time. There was a folded map, its edges curled and corners torn, and at the very bottom was a thick, sealed envelope with her name written in her father's handwriting. To Naima, my lion-hearted girl. She stared at it, frozen. Her heart pounded. The weight of it wasn't just in her hands, it was in her chest, her memories, her pain. But before she could speak, Mr. Tambo stood up and cleared his throat firmly. His voice cut through the tension like a knife. Ladies and gentlemen, there is one final clause left in Chief Sefu's will, he said, holding up a separate file. It is private, and it is meant for Naima only. The room gasped. What do you mean private? Someone asked sharply. Is this some kind of joke? Barked Malik. Aching scoffed. What does she need to hear in secret? But the lawyer's face was firm. Chief Sefu gave clear instructions. This part of the will was written by hand, stored separately, and entrusted only to me. It must be read with Naima alone. People were stunned. The laughter had disappeared. Whispers replaced it. Eyes darted between Naima and the box. The room which moments ago mocked her now sat in uncomfortable silence. Naima didn't speak. She just held the envelope tightly, as if her entire life was suddenly wrapped inside it. She rose slowly from her chair, clutching the box to her chest. Mr. Tambo motioned for her to follow him. And just like that, the girl they had called the maid's daughter walked out of the room, leaving behind a silence none of them expected. No one knew what was about to unfold, not even Naima. Naima followed Mr. Tambo down a quiet hallway, far from the noise of the main living room. Her hands were still clutching the wooden box as if it held her breath. They entered a small private study, simple, warm, lined with bookshelves and a large portrait of Chief Sefu on the wall. Mr. Tambo closed the door gently and motioned for her to sit. He placed the file he had carried separately on the table and sat across from her with a look she hadn't seen earlier. Not formality but softness. Naima, he began slowly, there is something your father never told anyone. Not even your brothers. Not even your aunties. And I kept it, just as he asked. Naima's lips parted slightly, her eyes wide with silent questions. Mr. Tambo opened the folder and pulled out a handwritten document, long, detailed, and stamped with an official seal. This, he said, is the real will. Naima blinked, confused. What about the one you just read? That was for the family's expectations, he said quietly. But your father, he had different intentions. He believed legacy was not about noise and show. It was about heart. And you, Naima, he said, were the only one with the heart to carry his true legacy. Naima's hands trembled. Mr. Tambo continued. He left you full control of Mugoma Holdings, his entire business empire. 80% of the company shares. The rest was just a distraction to keep them from fighting each other. Naima froze. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Mugoma Holdings wasn't just a business. It was one of the most powerful companies in the country, worth billions. He told me, Mr. Tambo said gently, that you reminded him of his mother. That you were quiet but fierce. That while others chased wealth, you lived with purpose. Naima looked down at the envelope from the box. Her name still shining in her father's handwriting. She thought they had laughed at her. But now she realized she had been carrying the real crown all along. Naima stepped out of the study without saying a word. Her eyes were calm, her face unreadable. The same family who had mocked her earlier turned to look, expecting to see shame in her walk. But she didn't even glance at them. She just walked past them, quietly, gracefully, holding the wooden box close to her chest. Poor girl, one auntie whispered. She must be too embarrassed to stay. I knew she couldn't handle it, Malik said with a smirk. Running back to the village, Aching added. Let her go. And just like that, Naima disappeared from the Mugoma villa. But she hadn't run away. She was on a mission. 2 days later, Naima arrived in the dusty village where she was born. She didn't go home right away. She pulled out the old map her father had left in the box. It was drawn by hand, marked with directions and landmarks only someone from the village would understand. She walked through forests, crossed a shallow stream, and passed a broken fence behind an abandoned cocoa farm. There it was, a forgotten old warehouse hidden among trees and vines, rusted at the corners and locked with a thick iron chain. Naima used the key that had been tucked in the box. The lock clicked open. Inside was silence, dust, and darkness, until she found the light switch. As the bulb flickered to life, her eyes widened. Rows of shelves lined the warehouse. On them were gold bars stacked in neat piles, original title deeds to lands all across the country, sealed files marked confidential, and a large safe built into the wall. She stepped forward slowly, tears filling her eyes, not because of the wealth, but because of what it meant. Her father hadn't just believed in her. He had trusted her to carry the future of the family. Everyone else had chased flashy gifts. But this was the real inheritance. Quiet, hidden, powerful. Naima sat on the floor for a moment, clutching one of the letters from her father. The world thought she had nothing. But in truth, she had everything. Naima sat on the cold concrete floor of the warehouse, her fingers trembling as she opened one of the old letters from the box. The paper was yellowed with age, but the ink was still bold and neat, her father's handwriting. She held it close to her chest for a moment before she began to read. "My dear Naima," it began. "If you are reading this, then it means I am gone and you are ready." Tears welled up in her eyes instantly. Her father's words weren't just instructions. They were filled with emotion, with weight, with truth he had never spoken out loud while alive. He wrote about how he had watched her quietly over the years, admiring her strength, her mind, her calm dignity. He confessed he had made mistakes. He said he had allowed the noise of the world, traditions, family pressure, the obsession with sons, to cloud his judgment. He said he regretted deeply not standing up for her, not giving her the honor she deserved in front of the world. "You reminded me so much of my mother," he wrote. "She too was overlooked because she was a woman. But she carried our family through storms no man could survive. Now, I see her in you." Naima wiped her tears but kept reading. "This inheritance," the letter continued, "was never about gold, land, or companies. It was about the story, the legacy, the soul of this family. Mugoma Holdings will survive only if it is led by someone with a heart bigger than ego, and a vision that sees beyond today. That person is you." With every word, Naima felt something awaken inside her. The pain of rejection, the years of silence, the shame she'd carried. It all began to fall away. In its place came something new. Courage, purpose, and quiet strength. She was no longer the forgotten daughter. She was the chosen one. Not because of pity, but because of power, the kind of power that lives in the spirit, not just in the vault. And now it was time to rise. 3 weeks later, the sun rose gently over Kerala, casting a golden light on the gates of the Mugoma estate. The once quiet compound buzzed with whispers as a line of sleek, black luxury cars rolled through. Drivers stepped out quickly. Bodyguards in sharp suits moved with precision, scanning the area. Something important was happening, and everyone could feel it. From the back seat of the final car, a pair of polished heels touched the ground. Then slowly, gracefully, Naima stepped out. She was a vision, dressed in a stunning modern African outfit woven with gold and deep royal blue. Her head held high, and her presence calm yet powerful. Her natural hair was wrapped in a beautifully styled geli, her ears adorned with traditional earrings passed down from her grandmother. There was no fear in her eyes. Only quiet fire. Only the woman her father knew she was all along. Gasps filled the air. Everyone, uncles, aunties, cousins, even the lawyer, stood frozen. Some looked away in shame. Others blinked as if they were seeing a ghost. The same Naima they laughed at, mocked, and dismissed just weeks ago was now commanding the estate they believed was theirs. She walked slowly, each step silent but louder than any words she could have spoken. No one said a thing. Not even the aunt who had sneered at her outfit during the will reading. Not even the brother who had joked that girls don't run empires. They just stood there, small, confused, guilty. Naima nodded politely as she passed them, not out of spite but grace. Real power, she had learned, doesn't need to raise its voice. It walks in silence and lets truth speak for itself. The gates of Mugoma Holdings didn't just open for her that morning. They bowed. And for the first time in her life they saw her. Not as the forgotten daughter. Not as the quiet one. But as the true heir. She had returned, not just to claim what was hers, but to lead it with dignity. The boardroom at Mugoma Holdings was tense. 12 gray leather chairs surrounded a long glass table. Men in tailored suits sat with stiff shoulders and forced smiles, whispering among themselves. They had heard rumors, whispers that the girl they had all dismissed was coming, but no one believed it, until the doors opened. Naima stepped in. She wasn't nervous. Not anymore. Her walk was calm, her eyes steady. She was dressed in a sleek black dress with subtle African patterns stitched into the fabric, quiet power, unmistakable grace. She didn't look like someone seeking approval. She looked like someone who belonged there. Silence fell across the room. Without a word, she placed a thick envelope and a set of sealed files on the center of the table. The shareholders stared as the company lawyer opened the documents, cleared his throat, and began to read. It was Chief Sefu's real will. The room held its breath as the truth spilled out. Naima, his daughter, was the majority owner of Mugoma Holdings. She didn't just inherit land or sentimental letters. She held 80% of the shares. The empire they had all tried to keep within their circle belonged to her. Gasps, coughs. A few shook their heads in disbelief. One older board member leaned back slowly, stunned. Another dropped his pen. Naima said nothing. She didn't need to. The lawyer's words were loud enough. Chief Sefu made it clear, the lawyer finished, that his daughter Naima Mugoma is the rightful heir to the Mugoma Holdings Group. All operations, leadership decisions, and executive powers transferred to her effective immediately. Naima finally spoke. Her voice was steady, low, and calm. I didn't come here to fight anyone. I came to build what my father started, with honesty, strength, and vision. The boardroom stayed silent, but this time it was a silence of respect. She gathered the documents, gave one last look around, then walked out as calmly as she had walked in. No shouting. No drama. Malik stood up first, slamming his hand on the boardroom table. This is a joke, he shouted. That girl, she has no experience. No right. Aching followed, his voice shaking. This is our legacy, not hers. We've worked too hard for this. But Naima didn't flinch. Instead, she opened another folder, calm and quiet. Inside were documents, emails, transaction receipts. She placed them one by one on the table as the lawyer read them aloud. Embezzlement. Fraud. Secret offshore accounts. Land deals signed behind her father's back. Millions missing. While my father was sick, she said softly, you were stealing from him. The room went cold. Security had already been informed. 2 guards stepped forward. Malik and Aching turned pale. Aching tried to protest, but Malik just lowered his head. They were escorted out, humiliated. The same men who once laughed at Naima were now the ones being shown the door. Outside the room, the aunties stood with teary eyes. The same women who had mocked her clothes, laughed at her during the will reading, and whispered behind her back now looked at her like they had seen a ghost. Aki mommy, forgive us, one of them said, her voice trembling. We didn't know. But Naima didn't even stop. She looked at them once, her eyes tired but firm. You knew. You just didn't care. And with that, she walked past them, not out of anger but out of peace. She wasn't seeking revenge. She had already won. Naima stood at the front of the hall, the Mugoma Holdings banner behind her, but her presence outshone everything else. The crowd was a mix of board members, villagers, journalists, and young women from the nearby schools. Cameras flashed, but Naima didn't speak for attention. She spoke from her heart. When my father died, many of you laughed at me, she began, her voice steady but emotional. You thought I didn't belong, that I was too simple, too quiet, too different. She paused, letting her words sink in. But legacy is not what you inherit. It's what you build with humility and purpose. It's not about gold bars or company shares. It's about what you do with it for others. The room fell completely silent. She continued, her eyes scanning the crowd. Today, I'm not here to just take over Mugoma Holdings. I'm here to transform it. This company will no longer be a symbol of pride and greed. From today, it will become a home for opportunity. People began to lean forward, listening closely. We will launch scholarship programs for girls from villages like mine. We will fund clinics for women's health. And we will invest in farming, clean water, and skills training for rural families across Kidala and beyond. No more broken promises. No more power in the hands of the few. Some villagers in the back were already tearing up. A woman whispered, "She's one of us." Naima ended with a quiet smile. "We rise by lifting others. This is not just a company now. It's a mission. It's home." The applause started slowly, then it roared. Even the journalists stood up to clap. The same girl they once ignored had become the voice of hope. And that day the seeds of a new legacy were planted. Not in gold, but in purpose, love, and justice. Naima stood at the edge of her mother's village. The same dusty path she once walked barefoot as a little girl now lined with singing villagers, clapping and cheering. Women in bright lassos danced. Children waved handmade banners that read, "Welcome home, Naima." It wasn't just a homecoming. It was a celebration of transformation. She had come back with more than just success. Behind her, trucks unloaded building materials, medical supplies, and boxes of books. A brand new clinic was already being set up near the market square, with trained nurses ready to serve mothers and babies. Just a few meters away, a beautiful school building stood. Paint still fresh, desks ready, blackboards clean. But it wasn't just any school. It had a scholarship fund specifically for girls who couldn't afford education, especially those being raised by single mothers or grandparents. The village chief stepped forward and held her hands tightly. "Your father gave you a name. But you gave that name meaning," he said with tears in his eyes. The women around her began singing a blessing song in her mother's language, calling her Mrembo wa Baraka, the beautiful one who brought blessings. Naima looked around, her heart full. The aunties who once looked down on her were now hugging her. The girls who once watched her from a distance were now surrounding her, asking questions like, "Can I be like you?" And her mother, standing quietly near the new clinic, smiled through tears, whispering a silent prayer of thanks. In that moment, Naima felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the peace of quiet, but the peace of knowing you fulfilled your purpose. She had turned pain into power, rejection into direction, and inheritance into impact. The village that once saw her as a burden now saw her as a blessing. And as the sun set over the hills of Kitala, Naima finally felt whole home, heart, and legacy in perfect harmony. Naima sat alone in her new office, once her father's, now hers. The room still carried his scent, his quiet strength, the leather chair he always loved, and the view he used to admire at sunrise. On the polished mahogany desk lay a small, aged envelope, the edges slightly torn, her name written in his careful handwriting. She had kept it safe all this time. Now it was time to honor it. With slow hands, she unfolded the letter and read it once more. Her eyes filled with tears just like the first time. "I knew they would laugh, my daughter. Let them. They didn't know I had planted my empire in your spirit. Not in my buildings. Not in my bank account. But in your fire, your kindness, your quiet strength. Rule with grace. And never forget, you are enough. Love, Baba." Naima gently placed the letter into a beautiful golden frame and hung it on the wall behind her desk, right above her seat. Every visitor would see it. Every decision she made would be rooted in those words. She leaned back, looking at the framed message as if it were a shield and a crown. This office wasn't just about power. It was about legacy, love, and silent strength passed from father to daughter. And now, whenever the world tried to shake her, she'd look up and remember. Her father didn't just leave her a company, he left her a calling.